Good morning, everyone. Kate Bohr and Fiona Pearman joining you for this week's Facebook Live, where we're talking about really looking at transforming. We've been talking about inner critic, self-doubt, imposter syndrome this month, but just thinking about what would happen if we were able to reframe that relationship from, this voice in our head that tears us down, that judges us, that, one client described as a very nasty inner critic. And we transformed that voice into one that was supportive and being a cheerleader and really helping us focus on the positive, focus on what we're good at, and really supporting us to rise up. And I think, Fee, this is one, that's relevant for most of us. And I was reflecting recently, a client was sharing a story of how she was going for a stretch promotion, and there was lots of mentors or supporters in the business who, were pushing her to apply and stay in the promotion circle or the opportunity loop for this particular role. But for those mentors and sponsors, she wouldn't even have put a hat in the ring. And I remember just leaving that conversation going, mentors and sponsors are fantastic, but what would happen if we could actually do a little bit more of that for ourselves?
And this is where the opportunity lies, because we are so good at finding all the reasons why not to, and all the that voice in the head that's beating us up, telling us we could have done it better, if only. And there's such an opportunity here to be a little bit more compassionate. Yes, of course, that voice is going to go off, and to start to question things, to get a bit curious about what would happen if I noticed the wins a little bit more, if I saw where I'd done well, if I was able to see my success and see how far I'd come, if I started to focus on those and to really celebrate and engage with that part, I'd start to build my own resources around this, encouragement and seeing the opportunity ahead, as opposed to, that difficult or the negative path. And I think the more that we start to notice things, and the more we start to offer ourselves the opportunity of seeing it differently and supporting ourselves, the more we're more likely to do things that maybe feel a bit uncomfortable. And then we'll start to get the evidence, oh, actually, I am okay. I can do things well.
Yeah, I think, it's inherent that our bias goes to the negative. It hooks into the brain's need for safety and certainty. So obviously, if we're having a negative experience, I want to change that. I want to eliminate that. We've all been in conversations where, 99% of the feedback we got was positive, and there was 1% that was negative, and we've just hooked into that. So I think, starting to think about how do I build the habit? Most of this behavior is on autopilot. We get captured and hijacked, and we kind of go into this vortex of the 1% negative. Being able to look at, how do I hold both? Yes, take the benefits and the constructive pieces of the opportunities, but to really hold the integrity of the positive. And even if there is no positive, being able to calibrate some of that constructive feedback so that we don't go into this well of, beating ourselves up or ruminating on some of those negative messages. And I think, to your piece there about being more compassionate with ourselves, and then, holding this perspective that, of course, there's things that we do really well, right? And there's things I'm still learning and growing with, and being able to acknowledge that and be okay with that. Brené Brown talks a lot about dare to suck. You have to be a 4 or 5 out of 10 before you're going to be a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15 out of 10. And so being able to stay in the discomfort of that and celebrate that. I remember there's lots of things, particularly when we're in that learning growth zone, where, just celebrating the small wins, not the win or the goal when I'm really proficient and it's a really big stretch goal, but actually the small wins that I'm, celebrating the small wins, and that we're continuously learning and growing, and we're on the journey, rather than, setting all these high expectations, which is what I think the inner critic does, right? The inner critic just has these unrealistic expectations of us, and then beats us up when we don't meet those expectations.
So the opportunity here is to really start to notice what's going on and to really start to hook into this inner queen, because we've all got that as well. Just as we've got that critic, we actually do have an inner queen. And to start to foster a relationship there starts with a little bit of compassion, starts with curiosity. You know, where's the evidence of what I'm doing is going well? We love the peace and growth mindset. Not so much what I can't do, or that beating up or telling ourselves what we're no good at, but I just can't yet. You know, just adding yet to the frame immediately opens up the possibility and says, I will have that capacity in the future, or if I wanted to focus on that, I could do that. So the more that we look for evidence, the more we start to celebrate and see the things that actually we are doing well and we've made progress on, the more that becomes the base by which we judge ourselves, and we're more oriented towards that queen voice than the critic.
Yeah, and I think we've often heard it, you know, your own biggest cheerleader. We don't love that language, hence why we use queen. But I think just this piece of, right, you know, for most of us, that's quite underdeveloped at the moment, that inner queen or that inner cheerleader. But the more that we can start to, you know, set a priority or goal to build that relationship and to start transforming some of that well-honed, you know, well-trained autopilot inner critic voice, starting to transition that and transforming that into this other resource, this other really supportive voice that can support us in terms of achieving our goals. I think the more that we won't be kind of blindsided by some of the inner critic self-talk that can really tear us down, but the more that we'll actually step into really congratulating ourselves, not just for what we're achieving, but for being on the journey as well. So we're going to leave it there. If you know someone who could benefit from today's confidence conversation or any of our confidence conversations, we'd love for you to share this video with them, tag them below, or of course share it with them in the messenger field. If you would like to be notified when we're going live or access a whole bunch of other really great resources, of course, and the library of all our Facebook Lives, be sure to like our Facebook page, Core Confidence. And if you'd like to go deeper with your relationship with Core Confidence, visit our website, coreconfidence.com.au. Have a great week.